So oil prices are going down, but do you think President Biden's going to get any credit for that? Let's talk about it in today's video. Hi, I'm Mike Greiner. I'm a lifelong Democratic activist who's concerned about the direction our country is taking. I'm also a lawyer and an academic, and I'm here to help you stand up to the BS the MAGA crowd is sending out. So in typical Republican fashion, Republicans were all about banning Russian oil imports as a measure to punish Vladimir Putin for his invasion of the Ukraine. Biden, who frankly has done an admirable job of standing up to Putin and has really gone the extra mile to support the Ukrainians in their battle for freedom, was willing to go along with that. But he knew what was coming, as did everybody. In fact, when he made the announcement, he specified the fact that any increases in the price of oil would be Putin's price increase, which is actually a much more accurate statement than what the Republicans have claiming, that these are Biden's price increases. I mean, the reality is that there's virtually nothing that the Biden administration has done from a policy standpoint that has affected the price of gas. In fact, if anything, they've been aggressive about releasing reserves from the Strategic Oil Reserve to try to increase the supply and thereby bring gas prices down. But Putin, on the other hand, with his invasion of Ukraine, even if the United States had not stepped in and imposed these sanctions, his actions would have impacted the price of oil. For the simple fact that Russia is a substantial supplier of oil in the world, less than the United States as an aside, but still a substantial one, that Russia essentially cooperates with OPEC in setting their oil prices. And by the OPEC countries in the Middle East cooperating with Russia, they've been able to essentially reduce their production to drive up the price of oil by reducing supply. Even so, Putin's invasion of Ukraine would have had a dramatic impact on energy prices even if the United States did nothing, for the simple fact that much of the oil and gas that goes to Europe actually goes through pipelines going through Ukraine, which are obviously going to be disrupted as a result of this invasion. What's more, the military operation is obviously going to demand substantial oil supplies. And in fact, the ineffectiveness of the Russians in getting oil to their troops has been part of the reason that they've been moving so slowly in their invasion. So under any circumstances, the supply of energy would have gone down and the demand would have gone up, thanks exclusively to Putin's invasion of Ukraine. So any increase in the price of oil that has happened since then certainly can be laid, at least in part, at Putin's feet. Now, while you could have counted me at the beginning on team transitory when it comes to inflation, in other words, I thought that inflation would just be a short-term issue until the economy got back up to speed after the COVID crisis. It turns out that inflation has been more enduring than most of us expected. And arguably, there were people like Lawrence Summers who were warning about that. And President Biden deserves perhaps some blame for that, given the fact that he put so much money into the economy as a result of the COVID relief bills in his effort to essentially protect everyone from the crisis that was the pandemic recession. That certainly could have resulted in some inflation as people come back to work very quickly. Yes, supply chain issues have been an issue with inflation, as have examples of corporate greed. But certainly one thing that's impacted inflation has been the easy money that's been made available both by the Fed and by the federal government with all their spending. So arguably that has impacted inflation. Now, does that mean that it was the wrong decision on the part of the Biden administration? Well, I would argue not, because the other option was people suffering for long periods of time with joblessness and with the inability to pay their bills as a result of the COVID recession. But nevertheless, at least you can make a case that some of President Biden's policies are related to inflation overall in the economy. That's not the case with oil at all. And in fact, in the measure of inflation that the Fed uses, they exclude energy because of the fact that there's so little impact that governmental policy can have on energy prices. So let's talk about oil prices for a minute here. For starters, the media has been incredibly misleading when it comes to the price of oil. One thing that's important to note is the fact that on a real basis, when you use the value of today's dollars as a measure of comparison, the price of oil today is actually less than it was back in 2008 and 2009. Back then, oil prices topped $5 a gallon in today's dollars. So these claims that we're dealing with all-time highs in the price of oil are simply not true. Secondly, the price of oil is determined on a global market, based on the amount of supply versus the amount of demand. When supply is low and demand is high, the price is higher. When supply is high and demand is low, the price is lower. It's very simple. Basic economics. Now, obviously, during the COVID recession, demand for oil was extremely low, so the price actually bottomed out and hit lows that we haven't seen really in my lifetime at all. So much of the increase in the price of gas that people have been complaining about prior to Putin's invasion have been directly related to simply the bouncing back of the price of oil as a result of people driving again after the COVID lockdowns had come to an end. Now, we're hearing all kinds of claims from Republicans that somehow President Biden has made policies that make it harder to drill for oil in the United States and harder for the United States to produce energy. And that just is not true. There are literally thousands of oil leases that are not being used. And what's more is when people point to the pipeline that the administration stopped, that pipeline wouldn't have been producing oil for years still. So it was irrelevant to the current situation that we're in now. Now, the United States remains a very significant producer of oil, and unlike how it was back when I was a kid, we're actually a net exporter of oil, which is quite a change. But truth be told, the amount that we're producing is down. Why is that the case? And again, it has nothing to do with President Biden. And this is a development, actually, that was occurring during the Trump administration as well. The problem is this, is back in 2008, 2009, 2010, the price of oil was extremely high. As a result of that, there was an incentive for producers here in the United States to do everything they could to extract every bit of oil that they could find. They were producing large amounts of oil because the price was high and they expected the price to stay high. They were investing in wells and different systems to be able to get the oil out of the ground, essentially. Well, what happens, though, is that then the price of oil and gas crashed. These oil and gas producers actually lost their shirts, if you can believe it. Even though when we look at ExxonMobil and some of these large producers, they've been always earning essentially extortionary profits. The mid-level and the small companies that produce oil here in the United States really suffered as a result of the drop in the price of gas. As a result, many of them went out of business and stopped producing oil and gas out of the wells that they had available. And it only got worse during the COVID recession when so few people were buying gas that at the low prices where gas was selling, nobody could make any money drilling for oil or gas. So the bottom line is, now that the price of oil has gone back up again, these companies are hesitant to invest until they can be confident of the fact that these prices are going to stay high. Well, as it turns out, they're not staying high. In fact, over the past week, oil prices have dropped by more than 22%, going back below $100 a barrel. Now, why is this? Again, it has to do with supply and demand on a global scale. Yes, Russia is not really producing much oil right now, and the United States is not producing the kind of capacity that it was producing back in 2008, 2009, and 2010. But once again, the demand side has been affected. What's happened is that in China, which has actually a surprisingly low vaccination rate against COVID, and where the vaccines that they've been using are far less effective than the ones that we have here in the United States, China has gone back down into lockdown in large sections of the country. What's the result? Well, it's very similar to the result we had here in the United States when we had the lockdown here. There's less demand for oil. That decrease in demand has once again reduced prices. Now, again, it has nothing to do with President Biden, it has nothing to do with any policies that our administration have done or could do, but they just have to do with the fact that this is a global market, and it's driven by how much people are willing to pay for oil. Finally, there's one more point to make about this. The oil that we're pumping right now here in the United States is not oil that's been affected by the Putin invasion of Ukraine. No, the oil that has been affected in terms of its price for that won't be in our pumps for quite some time, actually. So how is it that this invasion resulted in an almost immediate increase in the price of oil and the price of gas at the pump? Well, the reason is that oil is traded in what are called futures. They're essentially investment vehicles anticipating how much oil is going to be available and how much it's going to sell for. That's what the price of oil is based on, that you hear about when you hear, $100 a barrel or more or less. And that's ultimately a large part of how the oil prices that affect our gas that we get at the pump are affected. So what's really bothering these markets then is not necessarily that the price of oil in and of itself that we're using right now has gone up. It's the fact that there's this big uncertainty right now is what's going to happen in the global economy. We don't know how long this invasion is going to go on and how much impact it's going to have on the price of oil. We don't know if President Biden is going to be successful in getting Venezuela and maybe Iran to pump more oil. We don't know if China is going to be successful in getting Saudi Arabia to price some of its oil in Chinese currency rather than American dollars. All of this uncertainty is what leads to the higher price. Essentially, businesses are building into the price what they think the price could go to, not necessarily what it is. As some of this uncertainty settles down, I think it's fair to say that we can expect to see oil prices go down even further. The good news for all of us at the gas pump is that we've probably seen the worst of it, barring some new catastrophe that is unexpected, or Putin pulling some other stunt that makes things worse for everybody. But if you believe anybody is going to be giving President Biden credit for that, even the people who are blaming him when the oil prices went up, even when that wasn't his fault, well, I've got a bridge in Brooklyn to sell you. In fact, if you're interested in seeing some more about how disingenuous the Republicans are in their arguments that they make, check out this video that I recorded over here. I really get annoyed with Republicans making all kinds of claims about President Biden when they were defenders of Donald Trump. I'd like to know what you think about that. I'll see you in the next video. In the meantime, let's hope for continued progress. Thank you.